Question 1. Process analysis reveals that during a routine traffic stop in Baltimore City, a citizen begins recording the interaction with their mobile phone from the sidewalk. The officer is aware of the citizen's presence and the recording. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Baltimore Police Department officer in this situation, adhering to Maryland law and BPD policy? Option A. Engage in a debate with the citizen about their right to record, explaining why the officer believes it is inappropriate. Option B. Immediately order the citizen to cease recording, citing general concerns about privacy and officer discretion. Option C. Physically attempt to confiscate the citizen's mobile phone to prevent further recording. Option D. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record, continue with the traffic stop duties while maintaining situational awareness, and only intervene if the recording activity directly obstructs the investigation or creates a safety hazard. Correct answer is D. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record, continue with the traffic stop duties while maintaining situational awareness, and only intervene if the recording activity directly obstructs the investigation or creates a safety hazard. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the need for officers to maintain operational integrity and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing upon constitutional rights or compromising their duties. Misjudging the situation could lead to legal repercussions, damage to public trust, and potential safety risks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the citizen's right to record, calmly informing them of any specific, narrowly tailored restrictions that may apply, e.g., not obstructing an investigation or creating a safety hazard, and continuing with their duties while maintaining situational awareness. This approach respects civil liberties, upholds departmental policy, and demonstrates professionalism. In Maryland, citizens generally have a right to record police officers in public spaces, provided they do not interfere with law enforcement duties. The Baltimore Police Department's policies, aligned with Maryland law and constitutional principles, support this right while outlining limitations on obstruction. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the citizen to stop recording without any justification related to obstruction or safety. This action directly infringes upon the citizen's right to record, which is protected under the First Amendment and generally supported by Maryland law. Such an order, without a valid basis, would be a violation of civil rights and departmental policy. Another incorrect approach is to engage in a verbal argument with the citizen about their right to record. This escalates the situation unnecessarily, detracts from the officer's primary duties, and can be perceived as unprofessional conduct. While the officer may feel their actions are being unfairly scrutinized, engaging in a debate rather than de-escalating and proceeding with their duties is counterproductive and can erode public trust. A third incorrect approach is to physically interfere with the citizen's recording device, such as grabbing their phone. This constitutes an unlawful seizure of property and a violation of the citizen's rights, potentially leading to significant legal liability for the officer and the department. It is an egregious overreach that has no basis in law or departmental policy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the citizen's rights. They should then assess whether the recording activity is genuinely obstructing their duties or posing a safety risk. If not, they should proceed with their work while remaining aware of the recording. If there is a legitimate concern, they should calmly and clearly articulate the specific reason for any restriction, referencing departmental policy or legal precedent if necessary, and focus on de-escalation. The goal is to perform their duties effectively while respecting the rights of the public. Question 2. Process analysis reveals that a Baltimore Police Department officer observes an individual standing on a street corner late at night, repeatedly looking around and adjusting a bulge in their jacket pocket. Considering the principles of lawful police conduct within Baltimore, Maryland, which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate response to this situation? Option A. Conduct a full search of the individual's person, including their pockets and any bags they may be carrying, to ensure no weapons or contraband are present. Option B. Immediately demand to search the individual's jacket pocket, citing their nervous behavior and the visible bulge. Option C. Ignore the individual's behavior and continue patrolling the area, as their actions do not definitively indicate a crime is being committed. Option D. Approach the individual, engage in a brief conversation to assess their demeanor and purpose, and if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity and a threat of danger exists, conduct a limited pat-down of the outer clothing for weapons. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual, engage in a brief conversation to assess their demeanor and purpose, and if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity and a threat of danger exists, conduct a limited pat-down of the outer clothing for weapons. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Baltimore Police Department (BPD) officer due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential crime situation and the constitutional rights of individuals. The officer must balance the immediate perceived threat with the requirement for probable cause before conducting a search, ensuring that police actions are lawful and respect individual liberties. Failure to do so can lead to evidence suppression, civil liability, and erosion of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer observing the individual's behavior and the surrounding environment to determine if there is reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot and that the person is armed and dangerous. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Specifically, it adheres to the principles established in Terry v. Ohio, which allows for a brief investigatory stop and a limited pat-down for weapons if an officer has a reasonable suspicion that the person is engaged in criminal activity and is armed. This requires more than a mere hunch. It demands articulable facts that, when taken together with rational inferences, reasonably warrant the intrusion. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer immediately demanding to search the individual's person solely based on the observation of them looking around nervously. This fails to meet the threshold of reasonable suspicion required for an investigatory stop and pat-down. Nervousness alone, without accompanying articulable facts suggesting criminal activity or a threat, is insufficient justification under constitutional law. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to conduct a full search of the individual's pockets and belongings without any indication of a weapon or contraband. This constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure, violating the Fourth Amendment. A pat-down is limited to discovering weapons. A full search requires probable cause or consent. A further incorrect approach would be for the officer to ignore the situation and drive away without any intervention, even if the observed behavior, when considered with other contextual factors, might warrant further, lawful investigation. While avoiding overreach is important, completely disregarding potentially suspicious activity that could indicate a threat to public safety or ongoing criminal behavior is not a responsible or effective policing strategy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to encounters. First, observe and assess the totality of the circumstances, looking for articulable facts that suggest criminal activity or a threat. Second, if reasonable suspicion exists, conduct a brief investigatory stop. Third, if there is also reasonable suspicion that the person is armed and dangerous, conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. Throughout the encounter, officers must remain mindful of constitutional protections and departmental policy, documenting all observations and actions meticulously. Question 3. The control framework reveals that Baltimore Police Department officers are responding to a call regarding an individual exhibiting erratic behavior in a public park, reportedly shouting incoherently and appearing distressed. Neighbors have expressed concern for the individual's well-being and potential disruption. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the responding officers, considering the potential for a mental health crisis and the need to maintain public order in Baltimore City? Option A. Approach the individual cautiously, attempt to establish verbal contact and de-escalate the situation, assessing for immediate threats while considering the possibility of a mental health crisis and seeking to connect them with appropriate support if safe to do so. Option B. Treat the situation as a potential public nuisance offense and issue a citation or warning for disorderly conduct. Option C. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent further disturbance and assess their mental state once they are secured. Option D. Observe the individual from a distance and await the arrival of mental health professionals before making any direct contact. The correct answer is A. Approach the individual cautiously, attempt to establish verbal contact and de-escalate the situation, assessing for immediate threats while considering the possibility of a mental health crisis and seeking to connect them with appropriate support if safe to do so. Explanation: the control framework reveals the critical need for the Baltimore Police Department, BPD, to balance public safety with individual rights when responding to a situation involving a potential mental health crisis. This scenario is professionally challenging because officers must quickly assess a volatile situation, de-escalate without unnecessary force, and ensure the individual receives appropriate care, all while adhering to strict legal and ethical guidelines governing police conduct in Maryland. The potential for misinterpretation, escalation, and harm to both the individual and officers necessitates a nuanced and informed approach. The best approach involves prioritizing de-escalation and mental health support, aligning with the BPD's commitment to community policing and the principles outlined in Maryland law regarding mental health interventions and the use of force. This approach recognizes that individuals experiencing mental health crises may not pose an immediate threat and can benefit from specialized assistance rather than immediate arrest or forceful apprehension. It emphasizes communication, rapport building, and the involvement of mental health professionals when feasible, thereby minimizing the risk of unnecessary trauma or injury and promoting a more effective resolution. This aligns with the ethical imperative to treat all individuals with dignity and respect, even in challenging circumstances, and the legal framework that encourages diversion to mental health services where appropriate. An approach that immediately resorts to physical restraint or arrest without attempting de-escalation or assessing the individual's immediate threat level is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the potential for mental health issues to be the primary driver of the behavior and could lead to an unwarranted use of force, violating BPD policy and Maryland's legal standards for reasonable force. Such an action could also result in the individual being processed through the criminal justice system when mental health treatment would be more appropriate and effective, potentially exacerbating their condition. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the situation or delay response due to uncertainty about the individual's mental state. This abdication of duty can endanger the public, the individual, and responding officers, and is contrary to the BPD's mandate to ensure public safety and provide assistance. Furthermore, failing to engage appropriately with an individual in distress, regardless of the perceived cause, can erode community trust and undermine the department's legitimacy. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the potential for criminal activity without considering the possibility of a mental health crisis is also flawed. While officers must always be prepared to address criminal behavior, a failure to conduct a thorough assessment that includes mental health considerations can lead to misjudgments, inappropriate responses, and a missed opportunity to connect the individual with necessary support services. This can result in negative outcomes for the individual and the community. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid, yet thorough assessment of the situation, prioritizing de-escalation techniques. This involves active listening, clear communication, and a calm demeanor. If the situation does not immediately present a clear and present danger, officers should explore options for mental health intervention, including contacting BPD's mental health liaison or relevant community mental health services. The decision to use force should be a last resort, guided by the principles of necessity and proportionality, and always documented meticulously. This framework emphasizes a problem-solving approach that seeks the most effective and least harmful resolution. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant increase in average response times for domestic violence calls within the Baltimore Police Department over the past quarter. Considering the critical nature of these incidents, what is the most appropriate course of action for the BPD leadership to address this trend? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols and officer deployment strategies to identify and rectify operational inefficiencies. Option B. Implement mandatory overtime for all patrol officers until response times return to previous levels. Option C. Immediately hire additional patrol officers to increase the overall number of units available for dispatch. Option D. Focus on external factors such as traffic congestion and weather as the primary reasons for the increased response times without further internal investigation. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols and officer deployment strategies to identify and rectify operational inefficiencies. Explanation: The performance metrics show a concerning trend in response times for domestic violence calls within the Baltimore Police Department, BPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the department's ability to fulfill its core mission of protecting citizens. Mismanagement of resources or inadequate training in such critical areas can have severe consequences, including delayed aid to victims and potential escalation of dangerous situations. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes of these delays and implement effective solutions that align with BPD's operational guidelines and the public's trust. The most effective approach involves a comprehensive review of dispatch protocols and officer deployment strategies. This includes analyzing call volume patterns, assessing the efficiency of current dispatch systems, and evaluating officer availability and patrol routes. By identifying bottlenecks in the dispatch process and optimizing officer allocation based on real-time needs and historical data, the BPD can significantly improve response times. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the operational aspects contributing to the performance metric deviations. Adhering to the BPD's mandate for efficient and effective law enforcement services, as outlined in its internal operational directives, and the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission, Guidelines for Officer Performance and Resource Management. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of officers without analyzing existing workflows is insufficient. While more officers might seem like a solution, it fails to address potential inefficiencies in dispatch, communication, or patrol routing that could be the primary cause of delayed responses. This could lead to increased personnel costs without a proportional improvement in service delivery, violating principles of fiscal responsibility and efficient resource allocation expected of a public service agency. Another ineffective approach would be to implement mandatory overtime for all officers without understanding the underlying cause of the delays. This could lead to officer burnout, decreased morale, and potentially compromise the quality of police work due to fatigue. Furthermore, it doesn't address systemic issues within the dispatch or deployment systems, making it a reactive and unsustainable solution that could violate BPD's internal policies on working hours and officer well-being. Finally, attributing the delays solely to external factors without internal review is professionally irresponsible. While external factors can influence response times, a thorough internal assessment is crucial to identify and mitigate any controllable issues within the BPD's operations. This failure to conduct a self-assessment would contradict the BPD's commitment to continuous improvement and accountability as expected by the citizens of Baltimore and mandated by departmental oversight. Professionals should approach such situations by first gathering all available data, then systematically analyzing potential causes, prioritizing solutions based on their likely impact and feasibility, and finally, implementing and monitoring the effectiveness of chosen strategies. This data-driven, analytical approach ensures that resources are used effectively and that the department's performance aligns with its mission and public expectations. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates an unauthorized individual accessing sensitive surveillance footage pertaining to an ongoing investigation in Baltimore. An officer observes this unauthorized access and the subsequent downloading of a portion of the footage. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the observing officer? Option A. Immediately report the unauthorized access and footage download to their direct supervisor and the Internal Affairs Division. Option B. Share the observation with a trusted colleague within the department to gauge their opinion on how to proceed. Option C. Delete the downloaded footage from the system to prevent further unauthorized access and potential misuse. Option D. Discuss the incident with a civilian friend to seek advice on the best way to handle the situation. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the unauthorized access and footage download to their direct supervisor and the Internal Affairs Division. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential breach of privacy and the misuse of sensitive information obtained through official surveillance. Officers must balance the need for effective law enforcement with the constitutional rights of individuals, specifically the right to privacy and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Maryland law and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The unauthorized sharing of this information could lead to severe legal repercussions, internal disciplinary actions, and damage to public trust in the Baltimore Police Department. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are within legal and ethical boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately report the unauthorized access and potential dissemination of sensitive information to the appropriate Internal Affairs Division or supervisory officer. This approach is correct because it adheres to established protocols for handling potential evidence mishandling and privacy violations. Maryland law, like federal law, mandates strict procedures for the collection, storage, and dissemination of information obtained through surveillance. Prompt reporting ensures that the department can initiate an investigation, secure any compromised data, and take corrective action to prevent further misuse, thereby upholding legal obligations and departmental integrity. This aligns with the principle of accountability and the duty to protect sensitive information. Incorrect approaches analysis. Sharing the information with a colleague outside of the official investigation, even if they are also a BPD officer, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, potentially violating privacy laws and departmental policy. It bypasses the established chain of command and investigative protocols, creating a risk of further unauthorized dissemination and hindering any formal investigation into the breach. Discussing the details of the surveillance footage with a civilian friend or family member is a severe ethical and legal failure. This action represents a gross violation of privacy, potentially exposing individuals to unwarranted scrutiny and reputational damage. It breaches the public trust placed in law enforcement officers to safeguard sensitive information and demonstrates a profound lack of professional judgment and adherence to legal standards regarding confidential data. Deleting the footage without reporting the unauthorized access is also professionally unacceptable. This action is akin to destroying evidence and attempting to cover up a potential misconduct or security lapse. It obstructs any investigation into how the unauthorized access occurred, prevents the identification of vulnerabilities in the monitoring system, and shields the responsible parties from accountability. This behavior undermines the integrity of the investigative process and the department's commitment to transparency and lawful conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and ethical principles. When faced with a potential breach of sensitive information, the immediate steps should be: 1. Assess the nature and scope of the potential breach. 2. Consult relevant departmental policies and legal guidelines. 3. Report the incident through the designated channels without delay. 4. Cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation. This systematic approach ensures that actions are lawful, ethical, and contribute to maintaining the integrity and trustworthiness of the law enforcement agency. Question 6. Strategic planning requires Baltimore Police Department officers to consider the legal framework for searches. If officers have reliable information suggesting a suspect is concealing contraband within their residence in Baltimore, Maryland, but no immediate threat of evidence destruction or danger to life is apparent, what is the most appropriate course of action to legally obtain evidence from the residence? Option A. Rely solely on the citizen's tip to justify a search of the residence without further investigation. Option B. Conduct a warrantless search of the residence immediately, given the strong suspicion of contraband. Option C. Seek a search warrant from a judge based on probable cause derived from the reliable information. Option D. Wait for the suspect to leave the residence before attempting to search them or their vehicle. Correct answer is C. Seek a search warrant from a judge based on probable cause derived from the reliable information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate need for information against the established legal and ethical boundaries governing police investigations in Baltimore, Maryland. Officers must balance their duty to gather evidence and ensure public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts, but these shortcuts can have severe legal repercussions and undermine public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all investigative actions are lawful and ethically sound, respecting the rights of all involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted by Maryland courts, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. A warrant, issued by a neutral magistrate, signifies that law enforcement has demonstrated sufficient probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the location to be searched. This process safeguards individual liberties and ensures that police actions are judicially sanctioned, thereby maintaining the integrity of the investigation and any evidence obtained. Incorrect approach is analysis. Pursuing a search without a warrant, even with a strong suspicion, is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. While exigent circumstances can sometimes justify a warrantless search, the scenario as presented does not indicate such immediate threats to life or destruction of evidence that would override the warrant requirement. This approach risks the suppression of any evidence found, rendering the investigation ineffective and potentially leading to civil liability for the officers and the Baltimore Police Department. Relying solely on a citizen's tip without independent corroboration or probable cause to seek a warrant is insufficient. While citizen tips can be a starting point for an investigation, they do not, on their own, establish probable cause for a search. Acting on such a tip without further investigation or legal authorization would be an unlawful search and seizure, jeopardizing the case and violating constitutional protections. Delaying the investigation indefinitely until a warrant can be obtained, even if no immediate threat exists, might be overly cautious and could allow a suspect to escape or evidence to be destroyed. However, the primary failure here is not in the delay itself, but in the implicit suggestion that a warrant is not necessary. The correct procedure is to diligently pursue a warrant if probable cause exists, rather than abandoning the investigative avenue due to perceived difficulty in obtaining one. The failure lies in not adhering to the established legal process for obtaining judicial authorization for a search. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves 1. Assessing the situation to determine if probable cause exists. 2. If probable cause is established, diligently pursuing a search warrant from a judicial officer. 3. If exigent circumstances are present, carefully documenting the specific conditions that justify a warrantless search and acting within the narrow scope permitted by law. And 4. Always consulting with supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt about the legality or ethical implications of an investigative action. The goal is to gather evidence effectively while upholding the rule of law and protecting individual liberties. Question 7. Strategic planning requires a Baltimore Police Department officer to assess a situation involving a vehicle stopped for a minor traffic violation. During the stop, the officer detects a faint odor that they believe might be marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The driver appears nervous but cooperative. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Allow the vehicle to proceed without further investigation, as the odor is not definitive. Option B. Immediately conduct a full search of the vehicle for contraband. Option C. Detain the driver for an extended period while the officer attempts to gather more information independently. Option D. Secure the scene and request a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective to respond to further investigate the potential odor. The correct answer is D. Secure the scene and request a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective to respond to further investigate the potential odor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Baltimore Police Department (BPD) officer due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential public safety threat and the strict adherence to established legal procedures and departmental policies. The officer must balance the urgency of the situation with the constitutional rights of the individual and the integrity of evidence collection. Misjudgments can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and a breach of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately requesting specialized units, such as a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective, who are trained and equipped for drug interdiction and evidence handling. This approach is correct because it prioritizes officer safety, ensures proper legal procedures are followed for searches and seizures, and maximizes the likelihood of obtaining admissible evidence. Maryland law, like all U.S. jurisdictions, requires probable cause for a search. While the odor of marijuana can contribute to probable cause, the specific circumstances and the officer's training and experience in identifying the substance are crucial. Relying on specialized units ensures that the subsequent actions are conducted by personnel with the expertise to establish probable cause accurately and execute searches in compliance with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and relevant Maryland case law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating an immediate search of the vehicle based solely on the perceived odor of marijuana, without further corroboration or the presence of specialized personnel, is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks violating the individual's Fourth Amendment rights if the odor is misinterpreted or insufficient to establish probable cause on its own, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence found. Detaining the individual for an extended period without clear justification or the involvement of appropriate investigative units is also professionally unacceptable. Prolonged detention without probable cause can constitute an unlawful seizure. Furthermore, delaying the involvement of specialized units can allow potential evidence to be lost or degraded. Disregarding the odor entirely and allowing the vehicle to leave without further investigation, despite the potential for illegal activity, is professionally unacceptable. While caution is necessary, ignoring a potential indicator of criminal activity without a valid reason can be seen as a dereliction of duty and may hinder ongoing efforts to combat drug-related offenses within Baltimore. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a systematic approach to information gathering and action. This involves 1. Assessing the immediate threat to safety. 2. Identifying all available information and indicators. 3. Consulting departmental policy and relevant legal statutes. 4. Seeking assistance from specialized units when necessary. 5. Acting only when probable cause or reasonable suspicion is established according to legal standards. 6. Documenting all actions and observations meticulously. Question 8. During the evaluation of a potential witness in a Baltimore City assault investigation, Officer Miller observes the witness actively using their personal smartphone. Officer Miller believes that private messages on the witness's social media account may contain crucial information relevant to the investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take regarding the witness's private social media messages? Adhering to Baltimore Police Department, BPD, policy and Maryland law. Option A. Review the witness's social media profile for any publicly visible posts or comments that might indirectly relate to the incident, and disregard the private messages as inaccessible. Option B. Attempt to access the messages by claiming exigent circumstances, arguing that the information is needed immediately to prevent further harm, even without a clear and present danger. Option C. Access the witness's private social media messages directly, assuming that information relevant to an investigation is implicitly accessible. Option D. Request the witness's explicit, informed consent to review their private social media messages, or seek a warrant if consent is not provided or is legally inappropriate. The correct answer is D. Request the witness's explicit, informed consent to review their private social media messages, or seek a warrant if consent is not provided or is legally inappropriate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering and the strict adherence to privacy rights and departmental policy. Officers must balance their investigative duties with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's personal information. Missteps can lead to legal repercussions, disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are lawful, ethical, and in accordance with BPD policy. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining consent or a warrant before accessing an individual's private digital communications. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as BPD policy regarding the handling of sensitive personal data. Specifically, BPD policy, mirroring state and federal law, mandates that access to private digital information requires a legal basis, such as a warrant issued by a judge based on probable cause, or explicit, informed consent from the individual. This ensures that investigations are conducted within legal boundaries and that privacy is protected. Incorrect approach is analysis. Accessing the individual's social media messages without consent or a warrant is a direct violation of privacy rights and BPD policy. This action constitutes an unlawful search and seizure, potentially leading to the suppression of evidence and civil liability for the department. Furthermore, attempting to circumvent policy by claiming exigent circumstances without a clear, immediate threat to life or safety is an improper justification and undermines the integrity of the investigative process. Finally, relying on a vague understanding of publicly available information to access private messages is a misinterpretation of privacy laws. Private messages, even on platforms with privacy settings, are not considered public domain for the purpose of warrantless access. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information sought and its privacy implications. 2. Consulting relevant BPD policies and applicable state and federal laws regarding search and seizure, privacy, and digital evidence. 3. Determining the appropriate legal mechanism for obtaining the information, e.g., warrant consent. 4. Documenting all actions taken and the legal justification for them. In situations involving digital communications, officers must be particularly diligent in understanding the nuances of privacy laws and platform terms of service. Question 9. What factors determine whether a Baltimore Police Department officer has probable cause to conduct a search of an individual or their property in Baltimore City? Option A. The individual's refusal to answer questions when not under arrest or detention. Option B. An anonymous tip received by dispatch, regardless of any corroborating evidence or further investigation. Option C. The officer's personal belief that the individual looks suspicious or is in a neighborhood known for criminal activity. Option D. The totality of articulable facts and circumstances, viewed objectively, that would lead a reasonable and prudent person to believe that crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. The correct answer is D. The totality of articulable facts and circumstances, viewed objectively, that would lead a reasonable and prudent person to believe that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Baltimore Police Department officers, balancing the need for swift action in a potential crime situation with the constitutional rights of individuals. The core of the challenge lies in accurately assessing the totality of circumstances to determine if probable cause exists for a search, thereby avoiding unlawful intrusions, while still fulfilling the duty to investigate and prevent crime within Baltimore City. The correct approach involves a meticulous evaluation of all available information, focusing on objective facts and reasonable inferences that would lead a prudent person to believe a crime has been committed or is about to be committed. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by numerous Supreme Court decisions and Maryland case law. Specifically, it requires officers to articulate specific, articulable facts that, when taken together with rational inferences from those facts, warrant a belief that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found in a particular place. This objective standard prevents arbitrary stops and searches based on mere hunches or generalized suspicion. An incorrect approach would be to rely on generalized suspicion or stereotypes. For instance, stopping individuals solely based on their presence in a high-crime area, without any specific, observable behavior indicative of criminal activity, violates the principle that mere presence does not constitute probable cause. Similarly, acting solely on an anonymous tip without independent corroboration or further investigation that establishes reliability and predictive information would also be legally insufficient. Another flawed approach would be to conduct a search based on a vague feeling or intuition that something is wrong, without the ability to point to concrete facts that support a belief in criminal activity. These approaches fail to meet the constitutional threshold for probable cause, leading to potential suppression of evidence and civil liability for the department. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and established legal standards. This involves 1. Gathering all available objective facts. 2. Assessing those facts against the legal standard for probable cause, considering the totality of the circumstances. 3. Seeking supervisory guidance when uncertain. And 4. Documenting all observations and justifications thoroughly. This systematic process ensures that actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, protecting both the public and the integrity of law enforcement. Question 10. Strategic planning requires the Baltimore Police Department to prepare its annual budget request for essential equipment. Given a projected inflation rate of 3% for the upcoming fiscal year, and a need to replace 75 patrol vehicles that currently cost an average of $35,000 each, what is the estimated total cost for these replacement vehicles, accounting for inflation? Option A, $2, $677,500. Option B, $2, $700,000. Option C, $2, $752,500. Option D, $2, $550,000. Correct answer is C, $2, $752,500. Explanation: strategic planning requires careful consideration of resource allocation and operational efficiency, especially within a public service organization like the Baltimore Police Department, BPD. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it demands a data-driven approach to budget justification, balancing the need for essential equipment with fiscal responsibility and adherence to procurement regulations specific to Maryland State and Baltimore City. The challenge lies in accurately projecting future needs based on historical data and current trends, and then translating those projections into a justifiable budget request that meets departmental objectives while remaining within financial constraints. The most effective approach involves a detailed, data-backed analysis of projected equipment needs. This includes calculating the total cost of replacement and new acquisitions based on current market prices, factoring in anticipated inflation rates, and considering the operational lifespan of existing equipment. The calculation would involve determining the number of units needed, multiplying by the average unit cost, and then applying a projected inflation factor for the fiscal year. For example, if 50 body cameras are needed at an average cost of $500 each, and a 3% inflation rate is projected, the calculation for just these cameras would be /50 text units times $500 text unit times 1 plus 0, 03 equals $25, 000 times 1, 03 equals $25. 750 / This method is correct because it aligns with principles of sound financial management and procurement best practices, which are implicitly required by BPD's operational mandate and likely governed by Baltimore City's procurement ordinances and Maryland state purchasing guidelines. These regulations typically emphasize transparency, cost-effectiveness, and justification for expenditures. A detailed breakdown demonstrates due diligence and provides a solid foundation for budget approval. An approach that simply requests a blanket percentage increase without specific justification fails to meet professional standards. This is because it lacks the necessary detail to demonstrate how the funds will be utilized and does not provide a clear rationale for the increase. Such an approach could be seen as fiscally irresponsible and may violate procurement principles that require itemized needs and cost-benefit analyses. Requesting funding based solely on the previous year's budget plus a cost of living adjustment, without accounting for specific equipment needs or operational changes, is also professionally deficient. While cost of living adjustments are a factor, they do not address the actual requirements for equipment replacement, upgrades, or new technology that directly impacts operational effectiveness. This approach overlooks the dynamic nature of departmental needs and technological advancements. Finally, basing the request on anecdotal evidence or the perceived needs of a few officers without quantitative data is unprofessional and unreliable. Public funds must be allocated based on objective analysis and demonstrable needs that benefit the entire department and the public it serves. This approach lacks the rigor required for sound budgetary decision-making and could lead to misallocation of resources. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with identifying departmental goals and operational requirements. This should be followed by a thorough inventory of existing assets, assessment of their condition and remaining lifespan, and research into current and future technological needs. Data collection on usage patterns, maintenance costs, and projected replacement cycles is crucial. Market research for pricing and vendor analysis should inform cost projections. Finally, all findings must be compiled into a clear, concise, and data-driven budget proposal that can withstand scrutiny and demonstrate responsible stewardship of public funds, in compliance with all applicable Baltimore City and Maryland state procurement and financial regulations. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that Baltimore Police Department officers are expected to act with a high degree of discretion and adherence to constitutional principles. An officer observes an individual matching the description provided in an anonymous tip regarding a potential weapons violation in a high-crime area. The tip stated the individual was wearing a specific colored jacket and carrying a backpack. The officer approaches the individual, who is walking calmly and not exhibiting any overtly suspicious behavior. The officer decides to detain the individual for questioning and conduct a pat-down search for weapons. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required professional conduct and legal standards for this situation under Maryland law? Option A. Detain the individual for an extended period without clearly articulating the legal basis for the continued detention, and then conduct a search based on a hunch. Option B. Conduct a pat-down search of the individual immediately upon approaching them, without any prior observation of suspicious activity or articulation of reasonable suspicion that they are armed and dangerous. Option C. Inform the individual that they are being detained for questioning based on reasonable suspicion derived from the anonymous tip and observed matching description, and their pat-down search for weapons will be conducted based on the same reasonable suspicion that they may be in possession of a weapon. Option D. Detain the individual and conduct a pat-down search for weapons solely because the anonymous tip mentioned a weapon, without any independent corroboration or observation of suspicious behavior. The correct answer is C. Inform the individual that they are being detained for questioning based on reasonable suspicion derived from the anonymous tip and observed matching description, and that a pat-down search for weapons will be conducted based on the same reasonable suspicion that they may be in possession of a weapon. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal rights of an individual during an interaction. The officer must recognize the limitations of their authority to detain and search without probable cause, and understand the potential consequences of exceeding those bounds, which could include suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can sometimes lead to hasty decisions that disregard procedural safeguards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly articulating the legal basis for any search or detention. In this case, the officer should inform the individual that they are being detained for further questioning based on the reasonable suspicion derived from the observed behavior and the anonymous tip, and that a search will be conducted based on the same reasonable suspicion that the individual may be in possession of contraband. This approach respects the individual's rights by providing a lawful justification for the interaction and any subsequent search, aligning with the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures under Maryland law. It ensures that any evidence obtained is admissible in court and upholds the integrity of the investigation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Detaining the individual and conducting a search solely because the anonymous tip mentioned a weapon, without any independent corroboration or observation of suspicious behavior by the individual, constitutes an unlawful seizure and search. This approach violates the Fourth Amendment by lacking the necessary reasonable suspicion to justify the detention and search. The information from the tip by itself is insufficient to establish probable cause or even reasonable suspicion for an immediate stop and frisk. Detaining the individual for an extended period without articulating a clear legal basis for the continued detention, and then searching them based on a hunch or the mere fact that they were stopped, is also professionally unacceptable. This prolonged detention without justification can escalate into an unlawful arrest or false imprisonment. The search, lacking a lawful basis, would be considered unreasonable. Conducting a search of the individual's person immediately upon encountering them, without any prior observation of suspicious activity or a clear articulation of reasonable suspicion that they are armed and dangerous, is a violation of their constitutional rights. This approach bypasses the necessary legal threshold for a lawful stop and frisk, treating the individual as inherently suspicious based solely on an uncorroborated tip. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal standards and constitutional rights. This involves 1. Assessing the totality of the circumstances, including all available information and observations. 2. Identifying specific, articulable facts that support reasonable suspicion for a stop and frisk or probable cause for an arrest. 3. Clearly communicating the legal justification for any detention or search to the individual, if appropriate and safe to do so. 4. documenting all actions and justifications thoroughly. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal counsel is advisable. Question 12. Strategic planning requires the Baltimore Police Department, BPD, to consider how officers should respond when encountering a personal electronic device at a crime scene that may contain crucial evidence. An officer has just secured a crime scene and discovered a smartphone lying near the victim. The officer believes the phone might contain immediate clues to the perpetrator's identity. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take regarding the smartphone? Option A. Leave the smartphone at the scene until a warrant is obtained without securing or logging it. Option B. Ask a colleague to quickly look at the phone for any obvious clues while waiting for the evidence team. Option C. Secure the smartphone as evidence, log it according to departmental procedure, and await a warrant before attempting to access its contents. Option D. Immediately access the smartphone to search for any contacts or messages that might identify the suspect. Correct answer is C. Secure the smartphone as evidence, log it according to departmental procedure, and await a warrant before attempting to access its contents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations concerning the handling of sensitive data. Baltimore Police Department, BPD, operates under specific Maryland state laws and departmental policies that govern evidence collection, chain of custody, and privacy rights. Missteps in this area can lead to compromised investigations, inadmissible evidence, and severe legal repercussions for the department and individual officers. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can create a temptation to bypass proper procedures, making careful judgment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the device and initiating the formal evidence processing protocol. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and adherence to legal requirements. Specifically, it mandates that officers do not access the contents of the seized device without a warrant. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Maryland courts, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Departmental policies, mirroring these legal protections, will outline the precise steps for evidence handling, including logging the device, maintaining chain of custody, and obtaining the necessary legal authorization, a warrant, before any forensic examination of the data can occur. This ensures that any evidence obtained is legally admissible and respects the privacy rights of the individual. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accessing the device to search for immediate clues without a warrant is a direct violation of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches. This action would render any discovered information inadmissible in court and could lead to civil liability. Agreeing to a colleague's suggestion to quickly look at the device, even with the intention of being helpful, constitutes a failure to uphold departmental procedures and legal standards. It normalizes a disregard for proper evidence handling and creates a risk of unauthorized access and potential contamination of the evidence. Ignoring the device until a warrant is obtained, while seemingly cautious, could be problematic if the device is not properly secured and logged. While not as egregious as unauthorized access, failure to initiate the evidence logging and securing process immediately could create gaps in the chain of custody, potentially jeopardizing the evidence's integrity. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct above all else, even under pressure. This involves understanding and consistently applying departmental policies and relevant state and federal laws. When faced with a situation involving potential evidence, the immediate step should always be to secure and preserve it according to established protocols. If accessing the contents of the evidence is necessary for the investigation, the proper legal channels, such as obtaining a warrant, must be pursued. This systematic approach ensures the integrity of investigation, protects individual rights, and upholds the credibility of the department. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that Baltimore Police Department officers are responding to a call regarding suspected drug activity at a private residence. While observing the front of the house from the sidewalk, an officer clearly sees a baggie containing a white powdery substance, which appears to be cocaine, on a table inside the living room through an open window. The officer is lawfully present on the sidewalk. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in Baltimore, Maryland under these circumstances? Option A. Secure the exterior of the property to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately apply for a search warrant based on the plain view observation. Option B. Immediately enter the residence without a warrant to seize the suspected contraband. Option C. Leave the scene without taking any further action, as there is no immediate threat or consent to enter. Option D. Knock on the door and demand entry to seize the suspected contraband, citing the plain view observation. The correct answer is A. Secure the exterior of the property to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately apply for a search warrant based on the plain view observation. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between the immediate need to secure evidence and the legal requirement to obtain consent or a warrant before searching private property. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance public safety and investigative needs with the constitutional rights of individuals. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations on search authority without consent or a warrant. When an officer observes contraband in plain view from a lawful vantage point, this observation itself does not grant immediate authority to enter private property to seize it. Instead, the officer must secure the scene from the exterior to prevent the destruction of evidence and then seek a warrant based on the plain view observation and other probable cause. This adheres to the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and established legal precedent like Coolidge v. New Hampshire and Horton v. California which define the plain view doctrine and its limitations. The plain view doctrine allows for seizure of contraband without a warrant if the officer is lawfully present. The incriminating character of the item is immediately apparent, and the officer has lawful access to the object. However, lawful access does not automatically extend to entering private property without further legal justification. An incorrect approach involves immediately entering the private residence to seize the observed contraband. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against warrantless searches of private homes, as established in Payton v. New York. The plain view observation, while providing probable cause, does not create an exception to the warrant requirement for entry into a home. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the observed contraband and leave the scene without taking any action. While this avoids a Fourth Amendment violation, it fails to uphold the officer's duty to investigate potential criminal activity and secure evidence, potentially allowing for the destruction of crucial evidence and hindering the investigation. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to coerce consent from the resident to enter the property. While consent can be a valid exception to the warrant requirement, it must be freely and voluntarily given, not the result of duress or coercion. Pressuring a resident into granting consent undermines its validity and could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained. Professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of constitutional rights, particularly the Fourth Amendment. Officers must assess the situation, identify potential legal justifications for action, e.g., consent, exigent circumstances, warrant, and prioritize lawful procedures. When faced with a plain view observation on private property, the default procedure should be to secure the exterior and seek a warrant. Unless exigent circumstances, e.g., immediate danger, imminent destruction of evidence that cannot be prevented by securing the scene, clearly justify immediate entry. Question 14. Compliance review shows that a Baltimore Police Department, BPD, officer, while off-duty and in a civilian capacity, witnesses a fellow BPD officer engaging in behavior that appears to be preferential treatment towards a known associate during a minor traffic stop, but without any overt violation of a specific traffic law or departmental policy being immediately apparent. The witnessing officer is unsure if this constitutes a reportable offense. What is the most appropriate course of action for the witnessing officer? Option A. Confront the officer involved directly and informally discuss the perceived preferential treatment. Option B. Document the observed behavior in detail and report it to their immediate supervisor or the BPD Internal Affairs Division for review. Option C. Ignore the behavior as it did not involve a clear violation of a written policy or law and occurred off-duty. Option D. Discuss the observed behavior with colleagues to gauge their opinions before deciding on a course of action. The correct answer is B. Document the observed behavior in detail and report it to their immediate supervisor or the BPD Internal Affairs Division for review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a departmental directive and a potential ethical obligation to report observed misconduct. Officers are expected to uphold departmental policies, but also to act with integrity and report violations. The challenge lies in navigating these competing demands when the observed behavior is not explicitly covered by a clear, immediate violation of a written policy, but raises serious ethical concerns about fairness and impartiality. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action without prejudicing any investigation or violating departmental trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves documenting the observed behavior accurately and reporting it through the appropriate internal channels, such as a supervisor or the Internal Affairs Division, as per Baltimore Police Department, BPD guidelines. This approach is correct because it adheres to the BPD's commitment to accountability and integrity. By reporting the incident, the officer initiates a formal review process that can determine if any policies were violated or if further investigation is warranted. This ensures that potential misconduct is addressed systematically and fairly, protecting both the public and the integrity of the department. It also fulfills the officer's duty to report observed improprieties, even if they don't constitute an immediate, overt violation of a specific written rule. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the observed behavior because it does not directly violate a written policy or is not a criminal offense. This is professionally unacceptable because it abdicates the officer's responsibility to uphold the ethical standards of the BPD and to ensure fair treatment. Ignoring potential misconduct can foster a culture of impunity and erode public trust. Another incorrect approach is to confront the officer directly and attempt to resolve the issue informally without reporting it. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established departmental procedures for handling misconduct. It can lead to inconsistent outcomes, potential retaliation against the reporting officer, and may not result in a thorough or impartial investigation, thus failing to uphold departmental standards for accountability. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the observed behavior with other officers informally without making a formal report. This constitutes gossip and can create a hostile work environment or spread unsubstantiated rumors. It fails to address the potential misconduct through the proper channels and does not contribute to a formal resolution or investigation, thereby undermining the department's commitment to due process and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and ethical conduct. When faced with observed behavior that raises concerns, the first step is to assess if it clearly violates a written policy or law. If not, the next step is to consider the ethical implications and the department's overarching values of integrity and fairness. The most prudent course of action is always to document the observation and report it through the established chain of command or to the designated Internal Affairs Unit. This ensures that the matter is handled professionally, impartially, and in accordance with departmental procedures, protecting the integrity of the BPD and the public it serves. Question 15. The efficiency study reveals that the Baltimore Police Department, BPD, is experiencing a significant backlog in processing citizen complaints, leading to delays in resolution and potential public dissatisfaction. To address this, a proposal is put forth to streamline the process by implementing a new intake system that categorizes complaints based on initial perceived severity and assigns them to different resolution pathways. However, concerns are raised about ensuring that this new system does not compromise the thoroughness and fairness of complaint investigations. Considering the BPD's commitment to transparency and accountability, what is the most appropriate approach to managing this backlog while upholding these principles? Option A. Focus solely on reducing the sheer volume of complaints by implementing a policy that discourages the filing of complaints by requiring extensive preliminary justification from the complainant before acceptance. Option B. Delegate the initial screening and closure of all complaints to a single administrative unit, allowing them to dismiss complaints that do not present immediate, actionable evidence without further investigation or direct engagement with the complainant. Option C. Immediately implement a system that prioritizes closing complaints with readily available documentation, deferring more complex investigations until resources become available, and providing only a brief, standardized response to complainants regarding the status. Option D. Develop and implement a standardized, multi-stage review process for all complaints, ensuring adequate training for personnel involved in each stage, and establishing clear criteria for escalation and investigation, with a focus on objective fact-finding and timely communication with complainants. The correct answer is D. Develop and implement a standardized, multi-stage review process for all complaints, ensuring adequate training for personnel involved in each stage, and establishing clear criteria for escalation and investigation, with a focus on objective fact-finding and timely communication with complainants. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a critical juncture for the Baltimore Police Department, BPD, regarding the handling of citizen complaints. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative of efficient resource allocation with the fundamental rights of citizens to be heard and have their grievances addressed fairly and transparently. Missteps can lead to erosion of public trust, potential legal challenges, and a decline in officer morale. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of due process or procedural fairness. The best approach involves establishing a clear, documented protocol for complaint intake and initial assessment that prioritizes thoroughness and fairness, even under pressure to reduce backlog. This protocol should include mandatory training for all officers involved in complaint handling, emphasizing the importance of objective fact-finding, impartial review, and timely communication with the complainant. This aligns with the BPD's commitment to accountability and public service, as outlined in departmental general orders and ethical guidelines that stress integrity and responsiveness. Such a structured process ensures that each complaint, regardless of perceived severity or volume, receives appropriate attention, thereby upholding the BPD's duty to serve and protect all members of the Baltimore community. An incorrect approach would be to implement a system that automatically dismisses complaints lacking immediate, verifiable evidence, without a mechanism for further investigation or complainant follow-up. This fails to acknowledge that many complaints require investigative work to uncover the facts, and can lead to the perception that the BPD is not genuinely interested in addressing misconduct. This approach violates the ethical obligation to provide a fair hearing and could contravene BPD policies on complaint resolution, which typically mandate a process for investigation and resolution. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the speed of complaint closure over the quality of the investigation, leading to superficial reviews and potentially unjust outcomes. This prioritizes statistical efficiency over substantive justice, undermining the credibility of the complaint process and potentially leaving legitimate grievances unaddressed. This directly conflicts with the BPD's stated commitment to thoroughness and fairness in all internal and external investigations. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the initial assessment and closure of all complaints to a single, under-resourced administrative unit, without adequate oversight or specialized training in investigative techniques. This creates a bottleneck and increases the likelihood of errors, omissions, and biased decision-making, failing to uphold the BPD's responsibility to conduct impartial and competent reviews of all allegations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory obligations. This involves understanding the BPD's policies on citizen complaints, the legal rights of complainants, and the principles of procedural fairness. The next step is to evaluate potential solutions against these obligations, considering the impact on all stakeholders, citizens, officers, and the department as a whole. Prioritizing solutions that uphold integrity, fairness, and accountability, even if they require more initial effort, is crucial for maintaining public trust and ensuring effective policing. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that the public expects law enforcement to be both efficient in apprehending suspects and meticulous in preserving evidence. Officer Miller, responding to a robbery in progress in Baltimore City, apprehends the suspect fleeing the scene. Upon searching the suspect, Officer Miller discovers a distinctive wallet that matches the description of the one stolen from the victim. The wallet contains identification and a significant amount of cash. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Officer Miller regarding the wallet? Option A. Secure the wallet, meticulously document its condition and location, and then transfer it to the BPD evidence custodian following established chain of custody procedures. Option B. Secure the wallet and immediately take it to the BPD forensic lab for preliminary analysis to confirm its contents and potential evidentiary value. Option C. Take the wallet directly to the prosecutor's office to discuss its potential impact on the case before it has been formally processed by the evidence unit. Option D. Leave the wallet secured at the scene while Officer Miller pursues the suspect, intending to return for it after the apprehension is complete. The correct answer is A. Secure the wallet, meticulously document its condition and location, and then transfer it to the BPD evidence custodian following established chain of custody procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Officer Miller to balance the immediate need for information to apprehend a suspect with the strict legal and ethical obligations regarding the handling of seized evidence. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts, but any deviation from established protocols can compromise the integrity of the investigation and lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence in court. The Baltimore Police Department, BPD, operates under Maryland state law and federal constitutional principles, which dictate specific procedures for evidence handling to ensure its admissibility and protect individual rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately secure the scene and the evidence, document its location and condition meticulously, and then transfer it to the evidence custodian following BPD's established chain of custody procedures. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the evidence by minimizing the risk of tampering, contamination, or loss. Maryland law, like all jurisdictions, requires a demonstrable chain of custody for evidence to be admissible in court. By adhering to BPD's protocols, Officer Miller ensures that the evidence can be reliably presented to prosecutors and the court, supporting the prosecution of the suspect while respecting the rights of the accused. This aligns with the fundamental principles of due process and the rule of law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Securing the evidence and then immediately taking it to the BPD forensic lab for preliminary analysis by Officer Miller himself, without formally logging it with the evidence custodian, is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the established chain of custody, creating a gap in documentation and potentially compromising the evidence's integrity. It also places Officer Miller in a dual role of investigator and evidence handler, which can lead to perceived or actual bias. Leaving the evidence unattended at the scene while pursuing the suspect, even with the intention of returning, is professionally unacceptable. This creates a significant risk of the evidence being lost, tampered with, or contaminated by unauthorized individuals or environmental factors. It demonstrates a failure to prioritize the secure handling of critical investigative material. Taking the evidence directly to the prosecutor's office to discuss its potential impact on the case before it has been properly logged and processed through the evidence unit is professionally unacceptable. This premature disclosure and handling outside of established protocols can compromise the evidence's integrity and create legal challenges regarding its chain of custody and potential for bias. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and legal requirements. This involves 1. Recognizing the immediate objective, apprehending the suspect, but also understanding the long-term implications for the investigation and prosecution. 2. Prioritizing the secure and documented handling of all evidence according to departmental policy and legal mandates. 3. Avoiding actions that could compromise the integrity of the evidence or violate the rights of individuals involved. 4. Understanding that a thorough and legally sound investigation is paramount, even if it requires additional time or steps. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to reinforce officer conduct when interacting with citizens who are recording police activity in public spaces within Baltimore City. During a routine patrol, Officer Miller observes a civilian filming his interaction with another individual who has stopped for a minor traffic infraction. The civilian is positioned on the sidewalk, at a safe distance, and is not interfering with the stop. Officer Miller, feeling his privacy is being infringed upon, is considering telling the civilian to stop recording. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Immediately instruct the civilian to cease recording, citing concerns about privacy and potential interference with the investigation. Option B. Engage the civilian in a debate about their right to record and the perceived intrusion on the officer's privacy. Option C. Ignore the civilian and continue with the traffic stop without acknowledging their presence or the recording. Option D. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record and if there are specific BPD policies regarding recording in certain areas or during specific operational circumstances, calmly inform the citizen of those policies without demanding they stop. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record, and if there are specific BPD policies regarding recording in certain areas or during specific operational circumstances, calmly inform the citizen of those policies without demanding they stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the operational needs and safety concerns of law enforcement officers. Balancing transparency and public accountability with the need for officers to perform their duties effectively and without undue interference requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. Misinterpreting or misapplying BPD policy can lead to legal challenges, erosion of public trust, and compromised investigations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves officers acknowledging the citizen's right to record, while calmly and clearly informing them of any specific BPD policy regarding recording in certain areas or under specific circumstances, such as during an active investigation or in a sensitive location. Officers should avoid any actions that could be construed as intimidation or obstruction of lawful recording. This approach is correct because it upholds the principles of transparency and accountability, which are fundamental to community policing, while also respecting the rights of citizens as established by law and BPD policy. It prioritizes de-escalation and clear communication, minimizing the potential for conflict. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately demand the citizen cease recording without a clear, policy-based justification. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to record and can be perceived as an attempt to obstruct lawful observation, potentially leading to accusations of misconduct and violating BPD's commitment to transparency. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen and continue with the interaction as if the recording is not occurring, without any attempt to communicate or clarify BPD policy. This can be interpreted as dismissive and uncooperative, potentially escalating the situation and fostering distrust between the community and the police department. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument with the citizen about their right to record, becoming defensive and confrontational. This diverts attention from the primary duty of the officer, unprofessionalizes the interaction, and risks creating a negative public perception of the BPD, regardless of the legality of the recording itself. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first recalling and applying relevant BPD policies and legal precedents regarding citizen recording of police activity. They should prioritize de-escalation through calm communication, clearly articulating any policy limitations if applicable, and avoiding any actions that could be seen as obstructive or retaliatory. If unsure about policy application, seeking guidance from a supervisor is the appropriate step. The goal is to maintain professionalism, uphold public trust, and ensure operational effectiveness while respecting citizens' rights. Question 18. System analysis indicates that during a lawful traffic stop on a public street in Baltimore, Maryland, a civilian begins recording the interaction with their mobile phone from the sidewalk, approximately 20 feet away. The civilian is not interfering with the officer's ability to communicate with the driver, nor are they obstructing traffic or creating a safety hazard. The officer feels uncomfortable being recorded and believes it might hinder their ability to conduct a thorough investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Allow the civilian to continue recording from their current position, ensuring the officer's own safety and continuing with the lawful duties of the traffic stop. Option B. Engage the civilian in a verbal confrontation about their right to record, attempting to dissuade them. Option C. Detain the civilian for questioning about their intentions and why they are recording. Option D. Immediately order the civilian to stop recording and move further away from the scene. The correct answer is A. Allow the civilian to continue recording from their current position, ensuring the officer's own safety and continuing with the lawful duties of the traffic stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's right to record police activity and the need for officers to maintain operational integrity and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests while adhering to Maryland law and BPD policy. Misinterpreting or misapplying these guidelines can lead to legal challenges, disciplinary action, and erosion of public trust. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate recording and actions that genuinely impede lawful police duties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves allowing the citizen to record from a safe and lawful distance, provided their actions do not interfere with the officer's duties or compromise the safety of anyone involved. This approach aligns with the First Amendment rights of citizens to observe and record government officials in public spaces, as interpreted by Maryland courts, and consistent with general BPD policy on citizen interaction. The officer should acknowledge the recording, ensure their own safety and the safety of others, and continue with their lawful duties without undue provocation or obstruction. This respects constitutional rights while maintaining operational control. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the citizen to stop recording and move away without any specific indication of interference or threat. This action infringes upon the citizen's right to record public officials, which is protected under the First Amendment and generally permitted by Maryland law unless specific circumstances justify restriction, e.g., obstruction of a crime scene, safety concerns. Such an order without clear justification could be seen as an unlawful restriction of speech and assembly. Another incorrect approach is to physically confront or detain the citizens solely because they are recording. This escalates the situation unnecessarily and is not justified by the act of recording itself. Unless the citizen's actions constitute a clear and present danger, obstruction of justice, or a violation of specific BPD policy, beyond simply recording, detention is an overreach of authority and a violation of the citizen's rights. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen's presence and continue the interaction in a manner that is unnecessarily confrontational or provocative, thereby potentially creating a situation where the citizen's recording captures unprofessional conduct. While the citizen has the right to record, the officer also has a duty to conduct themselves professionally and lawfully, and engaging in behavior that invites negative recording is poor judgment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, adherence to legal rights, and clear policy compliance. When faced with a citizen recording, the officer should first assess the situation for any immediate safety risks or actual interference with their duties. If no such risks exist, the officer should permit the recording while continuing their lawful actions. If interference or safety concerns arise, the officer should clearly articulate the specific nature of the interference or concern to the citizen and request compliance, explaining the legal basis for their request. If the citizen refuses to comply with a lawful order related to obstruction or safety, then appropriate enforcement measures, consistent with BPD policy and Maryland law, may be considered. The default should always be to allow lawful recording. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that during a traffic stop investigation on a public street in Baltimore, Maryland, a civilian begins recording the interaction with their mobile phone from a distance of approximately 15 feet, directly across the street. The civilian is not obstructing traffic or the officer's immediate work area, but their presence and recording are causing the driver being stopped to appear agitated. The officer on scene needs to ensure the safety of the stop and the integrity of the investigation. Which of the following actions best addresses this situation? Option A. Immediately order the civilian to stop recording and move further away, stating that recording is interfering with the investigation. Option B. Engage the civilian in a debate about their right to record and the officer's authority to restrict it. Option C. Ignore the civilian and continue with the traffic stop without acknowledging their presence or actions. Option D. Calmly approach the civilian. Explain the need for a clear and unobstructed area to conduct the investigation, and request they move back an additional 10 feet to ensure no perceived intimidation of the driver and to maintain a safe distance, while acknowledging their right to record from that adjusted location. The correct answer is D. Calmly approach the civilian, explain the need for a clear and unobstructed area to conduct the investigation, and request they move back an additional 10 feet to ensure no perceived intimidation of the driver and to maintain a safe distance, while acknowledging their right to record from that adjusted location. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's perceived right to record and a police officer's duty to maintain order and safety during an investigation. The officer must balance the public's right to observe and record police activity with the need to conduct an effective investigation and ensure the safety of all involved. Misjudging the situation could lead to legal challenges, damage to public trust, and compromise of the investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation by calmly explaining the officer's actions and the reasons for requesting the individual to move back, while also acknowledging the individual's right to record from a safe and non-obstructive distance. This approach prioritizes clear communication and respect for civil liberties while maintaining operational control. Specifically, officers in Maryland are guided by departmental policies and case law, such as those stemming from the First Amendment, which generally protect the right to record police activity in public spaces, provided it does not interfere with the lawful performance of duties. The officer should clearly articulate the need for space to conduct the investigation without undue interference or obstruction, offering a reasonable alternative location for recording if the current spot poses a risk. This demonstrates professionalism, respects constitutional rights, and aims to resolve the conflict without unnecessary escalation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately ordering the individual to cease recording and move away without explanation, citing general obstruction. This fails to acknowledge the individual's right to record and can be perceived as an attempt to suppress legitimate observation, potentially leading to a complaint of misconduct and violating established legal precedents regarding public recording of police. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and continue the interaction as if they were not present. This is unprofessional and risks the situation escalating if the individual feels unheard or provoked by the perceived disregard. It also fails to address the potential for interference, however unintentional. A third incorrect approach is to engage in a prolonged argument with the individual about their right to record. This diverts critical attention and resources from the primary investigative task, potentially compromising the investigation and creating a public spectacle that erodes public trust. It also demonstrates a lack of control over the situation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and adherence to legal and departmental guidelines. When faced with a conflict involving citizen recording, officers should first assess the immediate threat or obstruction. If no immediate threat exists, they should calmly explain their actions and the need for space, offering reasonable alternatives for recording. This approach respects individual rights while ensuring the officer can perform their duties effectively and safely. Documentation of the interaction is also crucial. Question 20. The assessment process reveals that Sergeant Miller has meticulously tracked the hours worked by Officer Davis over a 2-week pay period in Baltimore. Officer Davis's regular hourly rate is $25.00. During the first week, Officer Davis worked 42 hours. During the second week, Officer Davis worked 45 hours. Assuming a standard 40-hour workweek, what is the total overtime pay Officer Davis is entitled to for this 2-week period, according to Maryland wage and hour regulations? Option A. Officer Davis is entitled to $187.50 in overtime pay, calculated as 3 hours of overtime at 1.5 times the regular rate in week 1, $25.00*1, 5*3, plus 5 hours of overtime at 1.5 times the regular rate in week 2, $25.00*1, 5*5. Option B. Officer Davis is entitled to $150.00 in overtime pay, calculated as the total overtime hours 8 multiplied by the regular rate $25.00*8. Option C. Officer Davis is entitled to $250.00 in overtime pay, calculated as the total overtime hours 8 multiplied by 2 times the regular rate $25.00*2*8. Option D. Officer Davis is entitled to $125.00 in overtime pay, calculated as 3 hours of overtime in week 1, $25.00*3, plus 5 hours of overtime in week 2, $25.00*5, paid at the regular rate. The correct answer is A. Officer Davis is entitled to $187.50 in overtime pay, calculated as 3 hours of overtime at 1.5 times the regular rate in week 1, $25.00*1, 5*3 plus 5 hours of overtime at 1, 5 times the regular rate in week 2, $25. 00*1, 5*5. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a critical scenario involving the calculation of overtime pay for Baltimore Police Department, BPD officers, directly implicating Maryland wage and hour laws. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires precise adherence to legal mandates regarding compensation for hours worked beyond the standard workweek, while also managing departmental resources and maintaining officer morale. Miscalculations can lead to significant financial liabilities for the BPD, potential legal action, and erosion of trust between officers and management. The correct approach involves accurately calculating overtime based on the established hourly rate and the total hours worked in excess of the standard 40-hour workweek, as mandated by Maryland law. This requires understanding the definition of hours worked and applying the correct overtime multiplier. Specifically, for any hours worked over 40 in a workweek, officers are entitled to 1.5 times their regular hourly rate. This approach is correct because it directly complies with the Maryland wage and hour law, which dictates overtime compensation for non-exempt employees. Failure to do so constitutes a violation of state law and can result in back pay, penalties, and legal fees. An incorrect approach would be to simply pay officers their regular hourly rate for all hours worked, regardless of whether they exceed 40 hours in a week. This fails to acknowledge the legal requirement for overtime pay and directly violates the Maryland wage and hour law. Another incorrect approach would be to exclude certain types of duty, such as administrative tasks performed during overtime, from the calculation of compensable hours without a clear legal basis for such exclusion. Maryland law generally considers all time spent on duty for the employer as hours worked, unless specifically exempted by statute. Finally, an approach that uses an arbitrary or rounded overtime rate rather than the legally mandated one, 5 times the regular rate, would also be incorrect and non-compliant. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and fairness. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the relevant state and federal wage and hour laws. 2. Establishing clear and accurate record-keeping procedures for all hours worked. 3. Implementing a consistent and transparent calculation method for regular and overtime pay. 4. Regularly reviewing and auditing payroll practices to ensure ongoing compliance. 5. Seeking legal counsel when interpreting complex wage and hour provisions or when developing new compensation policies.